So, if I may, I'll welcome you. It's my great pleasure to welcome Mihael Kovač, Professor Kovač, who's, among other things, who I was drawn to because in my book, The Rise and Fall of the Human Mind, I deal with the effects of digital technology on society. And in fact, one of my chapters is called The Decline of Democracy. And it shows a link to the digital effects that technology is having on the human mind. And you, among other things, have put forward a Ljubljana reading manifesto where, among other things, you say and state the reasons why reading in generally is important. And more importantly, you also have an article called Democracies Depend on Reading. So if I may, I'm going to ask you just to summarize that and why you and many other people, myself included, what's your angle on why reading is so important for democracy?
Well, it's in the end of the day, it's very simple. And what I would want to do first is to stress that, with reading, connection between reading and democracy, I don't mean any kind of reading, because these days everybody can read. Most of the people, read while they use social media and digital technologies. So being literate is not an issue anymore. But what is an issue is that there is not a lot of people who are capable of reading long-form, complex texts. For example, one of my friends, one of my schoolmates with whom I studied together at Ljubljana University long time ago, back in the times of socialist Yugoslavia, found a requested reading list for one of the exams at the Department of Philosophy. And for passing that exam, students needed to read about 5,000 pages of books. And today, if I would request from my students to read 5,000 pages of books, it's very likely that the dean will make a phone call to the psychiatric hospital in Ljubljana and they will come and pick me up, because nobody is requesting this from the students. So my point is that we are losing this ability to read long form. Text is somehow disappearing, and the question, together with a few colleagues from all parts of Europe, we started to ask ourselves, is this a problem? What do we lose if we lose this ability of reading more complex texts? And in the end of the day, the answer which came out was quite simple. One of the things which we get when we read these long, complex texts is that we know many more words which we don't encounter in social media and which we don't encounter in speech. And we also learn to understand more complex sentences. Namely, in written text, the sentences are more complex than in speech or again in social media. So by reading this kind of texts, we somehow train our brains how to tackle with this kind of texts, how to develop our vocabulary and how to develop our ability to understand complexities. And this is, I think, the ability which we are losing. And the reason why this losing this ability is a problem is because I see there is a kind of connection between, let's say, democracy and science. Namely, I think you say in your book that the truth is something what cannot be disproven wrong. As long as some scientist finds out a new truth. So, and in order to disprove that some truth is not valid anymore, we need to, we need to experiment. We need to do a lot of logical thinking. And in politics, it's to an extent similar. When we accept something as a policy, we need to check it through facts and through discussions. And in order to be able to check the policies through facts and through discussions, we again need this kind of knowledge which we get by reading books. So I see, I'm not saying that we should throw away all our digital tools. I mean, we are using it now, as a matter of fact. And of course, smartphones are good for many things. But what we need to do is somehow to balance this media with reading. And only this combination of digital technologies coupled with the, let's say, book-trained mind, I believe can produce good results.
Well, I don't think it's just what you believe. I think the science proves it. And I think I haven't read your manifesto fully, but you certainly have a lot of backup from neurology. To begin with, there are hundreds of studies that show that not just reading, but reading from a paper, from holding the paper, beats reading from a screen, even if the sentences are long and even if you're reading a book from the screen, because there are several reasons for reading from a paper is better. Same class, same curriculum, same teacher. One half prints it out on paper, the other half reads it from a screen. The first half does up to 30% better on standardized tests because you remember it better. Why? Because of evolution. Our brains are trained to remember things that we frame in frames, and paper frames text. There's no scrolling. And additionally, among other reasons, you also hold the paper in your hand, and that reinforces that tactile stimulus goes to your left brain where your speech center is, so it subtly reinforces what you're reading. There are other reasons as well, but this is one of the reasons that some schools, not most, are actually going back to paper reading. So first of all, it's what you read from. Second of all, what you said is exactly correct, and it is the beginning of the end. And the question, I think, for you and me is the end inevitable? A recent study showed that the vast majority of students admitted to Ivy League schools in the United States have never read a book from cover to cover, which is absolutely alarming because their brains, your brain is wired based on what it's exposed to. So if you've never read a book from cover to cover, you have no idea of plot formation. You have no idea of the background behind the background, which are the things that make us human. Those are the things which provide higher reasoning. Instead, if you ask a 15-year-old today to write a sentence or to say something that has more than 15 words, they can't, because the brain wiring simply isn't there. They have nothing in their fuse box. They're able to talk and think only in sentences that have 3 to 5 to 6 to 7 words and that have shallow meaning. So no wonder then that this trickles down to an absence of being able to even recognize important issues and debates, which are part of the democratic process. But now the question to you is not the democratic process itself under siege because of the digital age? Because in the digital age, debate is no longer relevant. It's no longer practiced. It's no longer relevant. And data moves far faster than the written word. Politicians today, you take Donald Trump, he goes to the bathroom in the morning, he sits on the toilet, he has an idea, he puts it into Truth Social. It goes out, it influences world policy before he's even done in the bathroom. Then he comes out, he sits behind his desk, and he says, that might have been a stupid idea. He writes another idea. He does something like 17 times a day. He creates world policy by driving out short little misspelled sentences and influencing data. And the data makes the markets go up and down and so on. So is reading even relevant anymore? in today's day and age where it's data and internet communication and virality that controls elections, that wins political debates. It's not about substance anymore. It's about viewership. So you said that you'd be sent to the psychiatric institute by your dean for making your students read books. His reply probably would be, well, reading books is no longer, and it's going to be no longer relevant in the world of the new human anthill. Is there a way to stop this? Should it be stopped? What's your take?
Well, obviously, I would not co-author this Ljubljana Reading Manifesto if I would not think that this really matters. And by the way, just as an info, that group which created Ljubljana Reading Manifesto also produced something what is called Stavanger Declaration, which stresses the importance of reading from paper in comparison to read from screens. And at least in Scandinavia, some authorities are really listening to these points.
Yeah.
For example, Sweden is going back to printed textbooks because they find out that kids just learn more from paper. So there is some, the idea is, let's say, is penetrating, but it's definitely something what we need to do against the flow. But, in the end of the day, the problem is that people who were reading complex texts were never a majority in history, unfortunately. But
that's true.
The problem which we have today is that we have a huge amount of people who are university educated. In my country, more than 50% of the generational cohort goes to university, but the education they get, I think, is just lousy because it doesn't require much of the mental efforts. So this is something I think we need to change. And it's these days I say it's a €3 million question because with a group of colleagues, we are applying for Horizon project with which we want to develop this kind of, let's say, promotional tools which would enable people to understand connections between thinking, democracy, and reading. But my question is, it's bloody difficult, but we should not give up, because if we give up, I mean, it's like saying goodbye to humanity.
Well, that's exactly what it is, and that's exactly how my book ends. I'm not saying that we should give up. I'm having these podcasts in order to find and promote and support a maintenance of human values, because at the end of the day, probably like you, I'm convinced, and you said it, that it's a very difficult battle. It's an uphill battle. The human brain works based on reward. So the question is, what's the reward now in reading a book from cover to cover? Never mind the fact that it takes time. How does that actually translate into meaningful reward for the reader when all the average reader is concerned about today is remaining addicted or hooked up at the very best into the technological world, which does their thinking for them? You mentioned that reading long texts helps you think. We all know it does. Why do people today even need to think if everything is, on the one hand, being done for them through artificial intelligence, and if, on the other hand, they can't get out of the digital world? It's now impossible to book a ticket, to file a tax return, or to do a whole bunch of other things. Here in the Czech Republic, we have the mandatory registration of a personal digitalized mailbox into which the government and all sorts of organizations can send you all relevant documents. So a 90-year-old person living in the country has to get a computer, they have to learn how to use it, and they have to register their mailbox, which I view as an attack on human rights. But that's another debate. So, yes, we all know you and I are on the same side of the argument, but is the argument even relevant anymore? And how can we make it matter when the system itself, the digital world, is basically stacked against us, where you have preconditions that have been met that actually derail the value of reading a novel.
Well, again, it's a very simple argument, but my guess is that we can use productively digital tools only as much as we have something in our heads.
Yes.
In other words, a stupid person will do with smartphone a lot of stupid things, but a smart person might use it for a lot of productive things. And my guess is that it's exactly the same with artificial intelligence. Idiots will become more idiotic, but intelligent persons who understand, let's say, how the human mind works, who understand what is analytical thinking, might use artificial intelligence to produce a lot of new knowledge. And again, I think Donald Trump is a very clear example. I mean, he's like a talking machine. I mean, he just blah, blah, blahs everything what comes to his mind. And I hope that humanity, at least certain parts of humanity, will be clever enough to figure out that this is just not the right way to do. For example, and this is a comparison which I use from European history, and it might be a little bit exaggerated, but nevertheless, I mean, if you look at the 30s, 30s were to an extent similar to these days. It was a lot of economic turmoil. It was a kind of globalization. It was also a media revolution with radio, cinema, printing developed in a way that it produced many more textual products than before. And all this became a mess. And people wanted to figure out what to do in this mess. And basically you have four answers. If you look to the history, you have fascism, Nazism, and Stalinism, which are a kind of, let's say, conservative replies to a messy situation in a way that they created a kind of firm, stable beliefs, which, let's say, declared anything and any events which were out of their mindset as a kind of enemies.
Well, these are populist authoritarian
But on the other
regimes.
hand, there was also United States with New Deal. And back then, that time American administration understood that people who can think critically and analytically and who have democratic mindset are the only possible barrier against the flow of totalitarian movements. So they invested into education, and they invested into libraries, and they invested into reading. And, America preserved democracy, which Europe abandoned in 1930s.
I know. Yeah, I
think that we are now in a similar situation.
I think there's two exceptions. The first exception is that unlike the entrance of the different media, propaganda, waves and types of media and new populist movements, this one, which is called digital technology, is addictive. Those were not addictive. You may have lost your life. You may have been put in prison. You may have been sent to the gulag or executed or so on and so forth, but they weren't addictive. Everybody has to have it today. It's impossible for any kind of policy of any sort to get done without the use of digitalization, and that means algorithms into the picture. Yeah. That's problem number one. And problem number two is that we still had, as you said, different parts of the world that were, despite all of that, still able to do things on their own. Today, the number of democracies is decreasing year by year. Democracy is no longer relevant. The system that did the most amount of good for the most amount of people in the shortest period of time in the history of humankind is communist China. And so democracy is no longer relevant, and it's not even, in my opinion, even possible to have democracy of the type that we had in the 30s, where you actually let people meet, debate, wait, decide, debate, and then move on. Yes, that is happening in Congresses, and it's certainly happening in the European Union, where all they do is debate and they don't do much of anything else. But on the other hand, here's the final point. The flow of money and the flow of information is now controlled by basically 8 individuals and 2 corporations. 95% of the people in the world get 100% of their information from Meta and from Google. And that's a completely new information dynamic. So at the risk of sounding wishy-washy and romantic, I think that maybe one of the ways to promote reading is to address Gen Z, which is in complete tatters as far as certain neuropsychological and intellectual traits are concerned. But they do have a couple of things going for them, and one of them is they want to step back. They want to pay more attention to lifestyle. They want to pay more attention to not pursuing necessarily the status quo. And basically, I think they might be convinced that reading will bring them the world and the peace and the relaxation and the ability to step back that they're looking for. So I think that you should create that reading list of 5,000 pages for your students. And I think you should do everything to make sure that your dean is fired if he wants to fire you. And you should give it to your students and tell them that they're going to need to read this, not because they're going to become better thinkers, but because they're going to become happier people. Would that work?
Yeah, well, that's one of the possible approaches, of course, and another thing which makes me a little bit optimistic is that, every new generation somehow rejects what their parents were doing. So if today grown-ups are obsessed with digital technologies, this makes a good reason for youngsters to return to different kind of media. I have an almost adult teenager living in my house, and the biggest happiness she made to me was when she requested for a Christmas present a new edition of Homer's Iliad and the record, an analog vinyl record of Iron Maiden.
Okay.
And I found this combination hilarious. But I think that's how some young people are trying to make a new meaning out of this messy world which we created. So, I'm not giving up at all. And again, if you look back to the 30s, and, you should not judge the, let's say, addictive force of totalitarian movements by Soviet communism, because Soviet communism was extremely boring version of totalitarianism. Nazism and fascism were much more dynamic in engaging with people. And if you look to this kind of movements, they were celebrating beautiful young people, and everybody who was inclined to democracy was considered as old dinosaur who will disappear. But what happened? Actually, a new generation of young people came out, and it followed up to those old dinosaurs who were inclined to democracy. So, there is hope, we should not give up the hope, because otherwise we can just close the world. And, let's say that I believe that humankind will somehow survive and make something productive out of this mess in which we are now. I'm not sure, of course, that all civilizations will survive, but some will do it. And again, I think democracy is the most productive way for surviving, because it allows discussion. It allows fact-checking. In authoritarian societies, there is no such thing. So that's why authoritarian societies on the long run collapse. because they don't amend their mistakes, but democracies can.
It's a question of what you mean by the word surviving. I'm not sure that from a neuroevolutionary point of view, democracy is the most productive way to survive. The most productive way to survive is basically through the colonization of a species and the formation of several very discrete caste systems, such as exist in ants or in bees. Ants have been around 150 million years, so they're record breakers. The average species lasts about 10 million years.
Okay.
So, but I mean, I'm just being difficult on purpose here. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I think democracy breeds opportunities, and it breeds deeper feelings of satisfaction. And I think maybe the way forward is to make reading somehow almost sexy or holistic, mystical, spiritual, to view reading as a commitment to stay within our evolutionarily given parameters, because the one thing we've not discussed, none of us have said this, is that no matter how this all ends up, we are biological evolutionary animals. And this headlong dive into a digital world is doing nothing more than derailing us from, or distracting us from, the necessities of evolution, which will not give way. They will not budge to artificial intelligence. We make our tools, and our tools shape us. So this is either going to shape us, as you said, to full or partial destruction, or it'll shape us back to realizing balance. So I'm with you. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep fighting. But I'm sorry we have to use the word fight, but I think that's probably in many cases what it is. Although you did mention Stockholm right at the beginning of your report. That was from a report that the Karolinska Institute gave out this year, in which they sharply criticized computer learning in general and called for a return to person-to-person teaching, and, as you said, for learning from paper and not from computer screens. So
yeah, well, if I may, I mean, I know that you don't like this kind of sport metaphors, but still, if I look back, for example, to 70s in my country, everybody was smoking, eating a lot of fat meat, and so on. And then a movement started, which started to promote healthy living in the way that it promoted exercise and eating more healthy and less smoking and so on. And the progress in last 40 years in this regard is huge.
Oh, absolutely.
Because people understand that they will live longer, they will live better, and their minds will work better if they will take better care for their bodies.
And there was
my guess is that regarding reading and thinking, we are somewhere there. People don't understand that eating a lot of fat meat in the form of digital and social media is bad for their minds.
Do you
and
think
we need to start working on this? We need to figure out how to do this. But I think that there is enough of us who understand that this is wrong, and perhaps in 40 years' time things will be better.
Back then we
will not be around anymore, very likely. But still,
thank God. Back then, there were also lobbies, the tobacco lobby, the alcohol lobby. They were extremely strong politically and financially. But can we defeat the immense it's the digital lobby? It's not just the AI lobby. It's basically the whole digital lobby. It's everybody who's involved in doing anything digital. They're basically either promoting or they're buying. So, I mean, this would represent a huge, for the first time in the history of humanity, philosophical reset in which all of mankind would have to participate, not just the 40% of smokers back then or the 60% of eaters of bad diets and bad food. This is something that everybody would have to come home and do something about. Do you think it can happen on such a scale against such huge financial forces? I mean, just the amount of money that's being poured into this on a minute by minute basis, just into artificial intelligence alone, is staggering. Because artificial intelligence costs energy, and that's a whole nother podcast. But you're aware of the fact that it's that these supercomputers and data centers are eating up millions of dollars every second now. So because they need electricity to run, they need water to be cooled, and so on. Can we stand up against such a behemoth, do you think?
Well, that's very important question which you addressed now, because all these huge companies, 5, 6, 7 huge companies, I would say they to an extent killed the market. There is no more capitalism in this area. We are entering a kind of neo-feudalist world where you have these huge digital kingdoms which are immune to market pressures because they are so huge, and destroying these huge conglomerates, I think, would be one of the necessities to democratize the world. And again, authorities in the United States in the 30s understood very well that monopolies are not good for an open market capitalist society. But, again, I'm an optimist. I believe that this kind of understanding will pop out in the digital world too in near future. If not, these big companies might just collapse someday, as the absolutist kingdoms in Europe in 16th and 17th century, with a lot of crash, of course, and through a lot of very painful revolutions. But this will change. And of course, one of the problems which we are having now is that we are somehow losing touch with history. We don't learn any more lessons. We don't learn any lessons from history, because if we would understood history, we would understand that all these things which are happening now with these huge conglomerates are just bad for the development of humanity, and even for the development of economy, as a matter of fact.
You're absolutely right. But when somebody is, to use the metaphor, addicted to digital heroin, history has no relevance. So the first thing to do is to detox, and then history can become relevant. So I think we could probably both agree that we're at the crossroads, in my opinion, of human civilization. You mentioned a few minutes ago that some civilizations may not make it through, and some may. I'm interested what you meant by that. Did you mean some cultures, or some nations, or some continents, or some types of business, or some types of capitalism? What did you mean by that?
I was thinking about societies as such. I mean, for example, look at the Habsburg Empire. It disintegrated because people who were running it didn't understand the internal forces. Soviet Union disintegrated as such. I'm not saying that what came out is much better than, okay, it's much better for some parts of it, but for the core, it's not much better, and here, I'm now speaking from Slovenian perspective, and my guess is the Czech perspective is quite similar. Czech Republic is huge in comparison to Slovenia, but in European and global context, we are small, and if we want to survive, we need to understand how the winds of history are blowing. And if we want to understand this, we need to read, we need to educate, we need to have, I know that this is disrespectful to say these days, but we need to have a kind of an elite, an intellectual elite who does the thinking. And bigger this elite is, of course, better for the society. And again, from the small society's point of view, it's very important that this elite is big, open, and democratic, because that's the only way to survive, And, again, from my Slovenian perspective, I have this strange luck that I live in a house of my grandparents, and this house was in 5 different countries in the last 70 years.
Yes.
But it was always a Slovenian house because we knew how to.
I know, but it was still a big world then. Today, it's just a small world. Thomas Friedman wrote a book which I think had the title "It's a Flat World," or something to that effect. It's the paradigms have changed, and I note, and I'm intrigued, and I thank you for your optimism of believing that some factor will come from within the system to cause cracks. But I think we have to go one step further and try and figure out what that factor might be and promote it. And as I said before, from my point of view, it might just be those evolutionary instincts that we're stuffing down the toilet right now that may come up to save us, as evidenced by your granddaughter who wants a copy of the Iliad and the Odyssey, God bless her, and a vinyl record of Iron Maiden. Maybe we are going to come full circle. So for me, I think that's a good positive note to end on, and I want to thank you very much for your determination and grit, and for the Ljubljana Reading Manifesto, and for coming on board with me today. And any closing thoughts or questions?
I just like to say thank you for your book. I mean, it was very, very interesting reading, because, for me, it was for the first time that somebody so closely connected these neuro things to the things related to human mind and to reading, as you did. So I think it's a great way how to continue to explore and research these issues. So I'm really grateful for what you wrote, as a matter of fact.
Thank you very much, and thank you for what you do and for coming on the podcast with me. And Slovenia is not too far from Prague. I have 1 or 2 friends, actually, who are from Slovenia. So if I do plan a trip there in the near future, if I may, I will reach out to you, and perhaps we can have, I understand you have some good wine down that way as well, and good food.
Oh, yes.
So
and also some good food, Slovenian cuisine that's one of the good things of being in the crossroad of Europe. It's a nice mixture of Italian, Hungarian, and Austrian and Balkan.
Wonderful.
Food. So it's really a kind of fusion kitchen before the concept was invented.
That's perfect. Thank you. Miha Kovač, many thanks for joining on the podcast, and all the very best. And we shall certainly be happy to send it to you as soon as we get done editing. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.